We are the Mateja Group of Keller Williams Realty. We enjoy the diverse community that we serve and the lifestyle that Maine has to offer. We'll be talking all things real estate and Maine. Welcome to the Maine Real Estate Show.
Hey, welcome everyone to the Maine Real Estate Show. I'm your host, Jeff Mateja of the Mateja Group at Keller Williams Realty, here with Harrison Smith, my co-host. Welcome, Harrison.
How you doing, Jeff?
Very good, very good. Another eventful week. I can't remember how many we put under, but it was quite a few. And the real estate market tends to heat up in spring, and it's here. Spring's here.
Well, and as with anything, there's no real warning. It just kind of happens. Like the market just opens back up, and sellers that were thinking about it are now ready. Buyers are now ready, and everything just takes off.
Yeah, there's no real crystal ball. It's funny how it just happens. You can plan for it. You can predict it all you want. It's just, when the market's ready, people, consumers have things going, and it just tends to be right around this time of year. So, here we are.
And you were running around with some clients this week, I know, looking at, buyers and sellers.
Right.
Conditions the same, kind of the same thing we've been seeing?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, inventory is extremely low. I just interviewed a client that between 400 and 500,000 in Wyndham, there are no single family homes.
Wow.
So 400 to 500,000, that's like a pretty sweet spot. So folks that are considering selling their home, there's an opportunity there to get on the market. There's no competition.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah. So, we had a great show last week, the short-term rental, STR, as we like to refer to it as, the acronyms. There's every acronym under the sun in real estate and even in the corporate world. So we thought we'd get rid of that, get away from it. So short-term rentals, the gist of it, awesome opportunity. It's a great way to get into housing, get into investments in particular, and, more than multiply your money through tons of different avenues, from hosting to co-hosting to just planning and investing. And you can do it in multiple markets that there are where Airbnb and VRBO, many of the platforms are, but just that there's so many avenues to do research and look into where's a good market to be invested in, where, a lot of folks I talk to, they generally had an interest in that place already. Maybe they vacationed there in the past, they still vacation there, and they picked up a rental picked up a property, investment property that then they rented when they weren't there. And that's how people naturally got into it. Now I'm seeing folks that all around the country that are doing this specifically to markets that they know are popular. They're going to get that huge cash on cash return, and people talking like 15, 20, even 30% cash on cash return is incredible.
Yeah. I mean, most people would be happy with an 8 to 10% return. You're talking, talking 20, 30% is crazy. But I'm always amazed when I travel around New England and even around the country, how many people have that tie to Maine in some way.
Sure.
Whether it was family or a vacation spot, I run into so many people that have a tie to this area. And I'm always fascinated by, how many people it eventually draws back.
Yeah, they'd summered here. They'd come up here for a camp, or as a kid went to sports or just an outdoors camp to spend time, or had done that year after year after year, 1 or 2 weeks of summer. And now they're doing it every summer for multiple weeks or even all summer.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the key takeaway for people before we kind of segue into this week's show is, real estate's a team sport, always has been.
Yeah.
Short-term rental is very, very much a team sport. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of things that are different, a lot of activity.
Right.
You need systems, process, and a team to really do that at a high level and be successful in a way where it doesn't become a job for you.
Well, and that market's always changing. So you have from regulation to the folks that just are more competitive and have that desire, right? So, you're going to get out-marketed if you just go and put it on one of those platforms and hope that it's just going to attract people. Well, there's folks that are using search engine optimization, SEO, Facebook marketing, Instagram marketing, and all these ads that are then popping up and directly booking. So they're avoiding that, waiting for the Airbnb, VRBO platform algorithm to show them, because so many people have looked at their advertisement in the past or have booked. So it becomes more popular and rises in the ranks. So you're competing on price, look, amenities. I mean, there's many different avenues that it's not just put it on there anymore. And there's so many different ways to arrive to your booking or your listing that people have come up with other clever ways. So you also have to stay up on amenities. It is a full-time sport. Cleaning, management, there's a lot that comes into play. But again, we do it. We do a lot of it. And we also don't claim to be the experts. So we'll get you in touch with other parties that can assist you. Just go to jeffsellismaine.com and we'll connect you with the parties if you have even just questions about it, want to invest in it, or already have properties and need management, co-hosting, are looking for other properties in different markets. STR Insights is a great tool, Price Labs, that we know that looks at where is a good investment opportunity and what should you be pricing your home as a short-term rental. Where should you be to be competitive?
Yeah, a lot of moving parts. So definitely do your research, reach out with questions, happy to connect, but it's definitely a team sport.
Yeah. And so today's show, we wanted to dive deep into affordable housing. I mean, even when we were on WGIN, the radio, we talked about affordable housing a number of times, and we'd love to get some experts on here as well. But we're reading numerous articles about affordable housing, that just affordability. I mean, prices have gone through the roof, and the focus hasn't been on affordable housing. And you hear a lot of, there's the not in my backyard NIMBY folks. There's also the prices we'll talk about a little bit, is prices everywhere went up. Not only land, but labor, materials that have made it tough to create affordable housing.
Yeah, it's been a challenge for, as long as I can remember. Everybody remembers the '08 crash. Prices hit big skid, everything down.
Right.
Kind of a slow recovery, and then the last 4 or 5 years has been a very rapid expansion of pricing.
Yeah.
And that has caused it's caused values to rise, but more importantly, in that inflationary environment we've been living through, everything's gotten more expensive.
Yeah.
So the materials you build with, the land you're buying, all the resources utilizing, the labor you need, everything's gotten more expensive. And when you have low inventories, we've talked about, and still have very high demand, prices go up. And now the cost of backfilling that inventory, new inventory, goes up as well.
And then you'll talk in depth a little bit later on to close out the show with Phenix Title. Patrick Thornton of Phenix Title, about title and just where his take is on the market, what he's seeing in the day-to-day, and offer some tips and advice for the buyers and sellers out there on title work and what they need to be aware of.
Exactly.
The good, bad, and indifference of the Maine title, and just the legal aspect of buying and selling property.
Yeah, exactly. I had a good chance to catch up with Patrick Thornton on a few things and dive a little bit into title insurance, but deeds, and some of that does actually tie back into affordable housing, because it's some of the ways you handle affordable housing kind of go into deeds and things like that Patrick handles. So interesting points of connection through all this.
So I know there's some headlines. It seems like it's every other week, if not even more often, surrounding affordable housing. So I want to dive into that and your take, seeing that more and more. I mean, you said, like before we went on the show, is that these guys and gals like to keep a low profile, because what they're doing is, they don't want to create competition, but they also have their niche that they're working through. That there's a lot of hoops to jump through, and the more people that maybe get involved might create that competition that wouldn't make it easy for them to do what they do, because it's a lot of work, and time consuming.
Affordable housing is a very complicated issue, and there's a lot of different ways to get at it. And as I mentioned before, in an inflationary environment where everything's gotten more expensive, it puts more pressure on being able to create affordable housing. But there's a variety of ways to get at that. So we've seen some articles lately where there are affordable multifamilies being built in kind of Old Orchard Beach and in Greater Portland, that are more focused on things like federal grants and credit, state federal grants, and also tax credits, which allow the cost of that construction to basically come down a little bit for the developer. So not only is the cost of construction a little bit lower through these grant programs, but then the tax credits also make the cost of maintaining that real estate a little bit cheaper. So you can lower the rents. That's one way. There's also things we've come across that falls right into Patrick's world, like deed restricted affordable housing, where certain segments of a project might be affordable.
Right.
So if, maybe I know in Scarborough wants 10% of all new units to be affordable. So if you build 10 units, one of those has to be a deed restricted affordable unit. Yeah. And affordability is classified as not making more than 60% of the median income of the area, because they don't want anybody to spend more than 30% of their income on housing. So it's this kind of big math formula that determines what the income level is that you qualify at, but also what that monthly cost can be. And that's how you back into what that price point has to be. And then you've got to reverse engineer the construction and the financing to allow that cost to work.
Exactly. That makes a lot of sense. So, and then there's different types of units, right? It's from modular and mobile that maybe not is desirable to some, but it's affordable, and tiny homes. So tell us more about those different units and the style and types and where those are popping up?
Yeah. So what I find interesting is I think we've been trying to solve the affordable housing problem by finding a way to make single family homes cheaper, which the reality of it is over the last few years, that's been a calculation nobody's cracked.
Right.
You just can't, with demand where it is, it's hard to take an existing home and make it more affordable. However, what we're seeing some towns, especially in Maine, but also around the country, that are getting creative with how they solve affordable housing. So I go back to the example of Bangor from late last year. Bangor took an old mobile home park and reapproved it as a tiny home community.
Sure.
So, I think we've all seen tiny homes to some capacity. Mm-hmm. They're very efficient, very affordable, but they're oftentimes viewed as, not a desirable type of housing because they're a little bit different. However, the younger generation loves them because they are efficient. They're simple. And we can get into housing issues down the road in terms of stock, but the younger generation doesn't want the house they grew up in. They want something that's a lot simpler and easier to maintain. So a tiny home works great for them.
Got it.
So Bangor took a chance to create more desirable housing to maintain a younger demographic, solving the affordable housing issue, but also finding a way to keep more young people in the area. And we're seeing other towns, branch into other options because there are other housing types we've tended to ignore that might actually be great solutions to affordable housing. And Scarborough Downs even just released recently that they're building tiny homes inside of that project.
Wow.
They're not necessarily affordable homes. They're not in that kind of bracket, but they are a different type of housing option that is in demand that I think we oftentimes overlook.
A smaller footprint that allows for greater density, at least, so that there's going to be more of them. So it's going to create more households.
Exactly.
And housing stock and inventory is really what that solves. Even if it's not affordable, it's still more units that are out there to house folks.
Yeah, and when we say maybe it's not affordable based on the equation that the state publishes, but it's more affordable than the 2,500 square foot colonial that's selling, down the street.
Right. And now I got you what you mean. Yeah. I mean, as far as like the state granting, money to fund this. So tell me too about greater density. So we tend to sprawl out. And as we leave like a city center, these developments then say, well, people want more land, and there's a reason why they move to a more, the suburbs. A more rural area is to have more lands, but that costs more. Or we need more density to create more unit, to make it economically, beneficial to these developers. So what does that look like?
Right. And I think one of the major selling points in Maine is space. We have space.
Sure.
Most of your houses are going to be on, a third to a half an acre on average, maybe a little bit larger as you go further out.
Yep.
And as you know, there's kind of two things that drive value. It's proximity to things, and then the real estate itself, the location of what you're buying. Yep. So for those people that are willing to go, more inland, your money goes a little farther with a single family home outside of Portland. Mm-hmm. But if you're in Portland or greater Portland, the only way to actually bring the cost down is to have more units. So I love the example of like Boston, or if anybody's been to Assembly Row down in Somerville, which is a relatively new development, they fit 100 units on the footprint that we put a single family house in. So when you can put 100 units in the same space as one, and you have 100 to 1 density ratio, not that we want to become Boston, but your economics are completely different when you're developing and selling than when you can only put one unit on that piece of land.
Yeah, that huge economies of scale creates that savings, and it's pretty wild.
Massive.
So then we also have the ADU accessibility now that LD 2003 has been passed starting in July, right? If I'm clear on that. July. Allows us to add to existing buildings an accessory dwelling unit, for those that don't know what ADU stands for. So Janet Mills, and working with state Senate, state Congress folks, passed this, and now what can people do as a result of LD 2003?
Yeah. So what LD 2003 allows is people to basically add a unit to their property. And it also allows some of the zoning to allow for more multifamily. So in Maine, we tend to have pretty strict zoning. You need one, it's a single family house per acre, maybe, or per 2 acres when you get further out from greater Portland. This now allows that single family home to become a single family home with the ADU. So now it can be another unit. Now that unit can be either used as like an in-law suite. So maybe you've got a family member living with you, which in theory frees up a housing unit somewhere else for somebody to buy. So it helps with supply. In some cases, they become rentable units, and some of the legislation has moved in a way where those units that haven't been able to be rentable in the future to somebody now can be. And I actually ran into somebody just a week ago at a closing, and they're doing these backyard ADUs, which looks like it's effectively like a tiny home in your backyard. That's an ADU, but LD 2003 allows those to be dropped in place and connected to your utilities. And now you've got another accessory dwelling unit, another living unit on your existing single family footprint. Yeah. So that increases density, creates more housing stock, creates more options, and is one way to help where we can't go back and fix density, but you can maybe add on like this to help get more units.
I'm just curious, all those ones that are detached, if that's going to create an issue for financing. 2 units on one lot in the past had caused some lenders to not be too thrilled of like, well, how are they connected? What's the plumbing, electrical situation? Are they, bumming off of sharing? Are they like separate metered? Like, well, what's that unit? Is that really a true 2 unit, or is it more like a, glorified garden shed that's been spruce, remodeled? Because they didn't like to see that in the past. So maybe, that'll change the banking world. Sure. But like I go to like condo associations is where my mind goes, is like, there's things that get done. And then it's like, well, we didn't really check with our insurance and our lender and our legal team before we went and did this. And are there going to be ramifications that come from and consequences that, yes, it created more affordable housing. It created more housing and inventory, yet we're going to have people that'll have trouble selling and having a financeable property in the future. Yeah.
And it's something that honestly I've not come across yet. I know some people that have done them, and they've either paid cash for them or maybe bought them off of like a home equity line of credit. Yeah. So they're kind of tying the real estate together, but not necessarily tying it directly together. Most of your ADUs in Maine are going to be above a garage or off the back of a house, and they're going to be attached to the main structure. Yeah. But to your point, when you add these new kind of almost like the tiny home concept,
I picture like a pool shed. Exactly. I've seen, even in Cumberland, Falmouth, you've got off the back of the garage a finished space that was once just the pool house or the, kind of a indoor patio that got you out from, the weather if it was raining and, it wasn't a swim day. Sure. And people have created that to be, a bed and a wet bar with a fridge, bathroom. Yep. And, is that going to cause any issues? And only time will tell. But I imagine some lenders, you might want to check ahead before you spend that kind of money.
It's going to be a bridge has to be crossed at some point here if these things become more and more popular. And I know that from speaking from the people I talk to, they're booked out. It's, you're months away from getting one.
Oh, absolutely.
And they're, it's just like, we talked about the tiny homes that come out of Holton, Maine. They're booked out to capacity for a year or two. And I think that as we've become more open to these different housing options, you're going to see more and more of this work pop up, more and more of these companies pop up, more and more resources go to supporting them, which ultimately certainly helps the construction industry, but also just continues to pull more people into that trade world that we already don't have enough people for.
Yeah. And I think, buyers are really looking for that connectivity. So some of these, like that mobile home park that was converted to tiny homes, people just want that neighborhood, that sense of belonging to something, and then accessibility to the highway, schools, public transportation, where they, do their consuming. Yep. As long as that's close by, this is a no-brainer.
Yeah. And that younger generation, they grew up in the big colonial house that their parents owned. They don't want that house. They want the smaller house closer to things. Yeah. It's more lifestyle. I think for a lot of us, home ownership was a prideful thing. We wanted to have a nice home and be comfortable. And I think for the younger generation, they don't care about that so much. They see a home as nothing more than a place to put my stuff and sleep at night, but I really want to be closer to things so I can go out and experience versus, hang out around the house and mow the lawn.
It's less to maintain, less to clean. And then rehab if at the point in time that comes, like less to paint, less to et cetera. So awesome. We'll next head over to talk to Patrick.
We've got a very special guest today in studio. I'm joined today by Patrick Thornton. How are you doing, Patrick?
Good. How are you, Harrison? Good to see you.
Good. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for visiting us today.
Yeah, happy to.
All right. So for those people that don't know who you are, can you talk a little about who you are and also kind of give us an intro into what Phenix title is?
Sure. Yeah. Patrick Thornton. I'm a lawyer in Maine. I'm the managing attorney and vice president for Phenix Title. Basically, I oversee the company's operations in the state of Maine. Okay. So, been a lawyer since 2007. Been in title work, give or take, since '97. So, but that's my role right now is managing state of Maine operations for our title company.
Okay. And for those that aren't familiar with the title company, so what is a title company, and what does a title company do?
Yeah, so title company is sort of shorthand for a set of jobs, right? So really, I would say three main prongs. One is we're searching the title, and that's probably what everybody thinks of. We're called a title company. That means somebody's reviewing registry records to figure out who owns this piece of real estate. Are there any liens against it? What mortgages need to be paid off? What rights come with it? What rights are against it? And put together a title search. Then also we're a closing company, right? That means we host the actual closing. So we're going to sit down at a table. Somebody from our company will run that closing to hand out documents, collect signatures, notarize whatever needs to be signed. And then we're also an escrow company, right? So that means we take in all the money from the lender and the buyer, and we disperse that money to everybody that has to get paid. So that's the seller, any liens or mortgages, the real estate brokers, any tax bills, anything else. You sort of take all those three under one umbrella. Call it a title company, but really it's title, closing, and escrow are sort of three, closely related but separate tasks that we take care of for a real estate transaction.
Okay, great. And a lot of times you're working on a transaction. Maybe clients don't even know yet that you're involved. So, when would clients begin to interact with you, and when do they really see you in the transaction?
Yeah, so buyers don't interact with us a whole lot, especially if they have a lender. They will usually get an opening questionnaire from us that just says who we are, how to get in touch with us, and some very basic information. But a lot of what we need will come directly from a lender or the broker. We'll reach out to the seller, do a little bit more with the seller as far as who do they think they owe any mortgages or liens to, and we double check that to find out. And then we kind of don't really have a lot of interaction with the buyer or seller from that point until we're ready to schedule. So you go under contract, there's sort of an initial touch. And then usually the lenders and the brokers are figuring out appraisal, inspection, whatever else needs to happen from the moment of contract to the moment of closing. And at some point in time, usually a handful of days before we're ready to close, we start to schedule. And then you'd hear from us at that point. We're ready to schedule, pick out a time and place, and then really interact with them at closing. You sit down for a half an hour to an hour to kind of go over everything, make sure it meets expectations. It's the deal that everybody expected. In 99% of the closings, everybody's sort of understands before they sit down what the deal is. But to the extent we need to explain anything or make sure that everything is what was expected, we do that at the closing table. And obviously that's when you collect all the signatures, money, and then close it, hand out the money, and tell people congratulations. So
the best part, right?
Absolutely. It's the best part of the job by far.
So you guys are doing all the legal prep, all the title searches, you're the facilitator of the closing. Right. So, kind of quarterbacking all those various parties to that final closing date.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're coordinating with lender, two brokers, buyers and sellers, and then occasionally other parties that need to be involved. If there's an unusual payoff or a surveyor or who knows what, there's always something new that comes up. But we're sort of, there's an old joke about, you're essentially the guy at the front of the rowboat telling everybody when to row, and hopefully everybody starts rowing at the same time. And if it works, you hit the closing on schedule. And that's always the idea, is to get people to the closing table at the time and date they were expecting, and give them what they want, so that it's almost in some way like being like a good umpire or a good official. Like in a good closing, you almost don't notice us, right? Yep. We said hello at the beginning. We did our work. Everybody else did the work they were supposed to. And then you see us at the end. We, sort of shake hands and call it good game, and everybody gets what they want. Yep. That doesn't always happen, but ideally that's kind of the idea, is that for the consumer, the buyer and the seller, it's a smooth experience where professionals do their job and we have a nice closing.
Okay. So perfect. Yeah. What we're all hoping for. When we
exactly.
Go into this.
Yeah. And then you obviously want to have somebody who's able to troubleshoot if and when, you need that, which sometimes it happens, right? Something comes up. So,
exactly. Yeah. And along those same lines, you guys oftentimes have to get involved and deal with some kind of issues along the way, or things you find. Yep. What are some of the common issues you do find?
We'll deal with, usually with the title search is where we'll find issues that the seller didn't know about. Mm-hmm. A forgotten home equity line that they opened years ago, forgot that they still have, and now maybe that bank has been bought out by another. That's a common one. We're tracking down that release to make sure it's taken care of. Every once in a while, you find someone who has old judgment liens. They got into credit card debt. They just sort of ignored it. And credit card companies don't really give up. They just sort of go quiet. And then when you go to sell an asset, they pop up and say, well, we want our money with interest. So tracking down that kind of stuff. Every once in a while, especially if it's a property that's been in a family for a while, we'll find out having done title that, grandma's estate was never probated. We need to track down who was supposed to do that. Is there a signature we need from an aunt or an uncle or some other family relative who maybe doesn't even know it, but there was some 1/22nd owner of the property, or, they hold some small fraction and we need them to sign off. So we'll work with sellers to try and run down those problems. Again, mostly we don't need to do that, but when it happens, that's where you sort of have to have a little knowledge and some bedside manner and get talking to a seller about what their issue is and give them a path to, here's how we're going to get this closed, especially if we want to close it on time without having to extend the contract or, God forbid, lose the buyer and have to go back to square one. So,
gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. Makes sense. Okay. So one of the common misconceptions, or sometimes the words we use incorrectly, are we talk about title and we talk about deed,
right?
Which are kind of the same thing, but still separate things. Can you talk a little bit about title versus deed? Yeah.
The analogy I always use is, and I think this is the reason why a lot of people confuse it, is almost everybody owned a car before they owned their first piece of real estate, right?
Sure.
And when you bought a car, you got in the mail from the state of Maine or whatever state you're from, a very fancy piece of paper that said title, was on nice thick stock and had a seal on it. And you knew, all right, I'm the owner. And I think a lot of people think the deed is the same thing, but it's really not. The deed is really more analogous to a bill of sale, right? It's showing that this item transferred at one point from one person to another, but it doesn't prove ownership, right? I mean, if you're going to go buy a used car, and you said to the seller, okay, can I see the title or can I have the title? And they said, well, I don't have the title, but I have the bill of sale from when I got it, right? What would your reaction be? Well, hold on.
Yeah.
How do I even know you own it? And that's kind of what a deed it's good information, tells you about the property, gives you a place to start some research to find out status of title. But the thing with real estate is there's no one document, unlike a car where you get one piece of paper, it's clear, it's done. Real estate's just so much more complicated. You can divide it, redivide it, combine it. You can grant easements. It's just anything under the sun could have happened. And also has a much longer history, right? Your car was built, within your lifetime, whereas a piece of land may have hundreds of years of deeds and easements and other documents at the registry. So title is really kind of the theory of ownership that we run under in a common law world, which is United States, England. And really the only way to truly understand title is to do a title search. And that involves somebody who has some understanding of real estate law, reviewing records at the Registry of Deeds. And that's what we do. And we produce something called a title commitment, which says, hey, we can insure this piece of real estate. We're confident enough after our research to know who owns it, know what rights are out there and what restrictions there are. And we present to a buyer and a lender an offer to insure. That's what we do. There are other ways to do it. Sometimes in the old days, you'd see law firms where they'd write an opinion of title, just sort of telling you what's up. Ours is a very specific. We're also, I guess I didn't talk about this before, but we're also an insurance company. We're going to insure the title. So for the buyer, if there's ever a problem with our research or something was not recorded right at the registry, there's an insurance policy that will step in to protect that person. But that's really your difference between title and deed. Is your deed's a nice piece of evidence, shows the transfer at one moment in time, but title is a much broader concept that involves a lot of research and knowledge, frankly.
Gotcha. And you mentioned that title commitment. So you're going through the registry to see all the records. We're in Maine. We've got some incredibly old housing stock. Are you guys going back through the entire life cycle of a piece of property?
No. So the general rule is 40 years is a full title search, because that's the statute of limitations for a real estate claim is 20 years. You go 40 to try and make sure there was no period of time that was told, meaning that where that statute of limitations was put on pause. 40 years is your full title search. A lot of scenarios exist where you don't quite go that far, especially if, by looking at the search, you kind of do a risk analysis, right? As an insurance company, we have underwriters, or we're an insurance agent, but we rely somewhat on underwriters to tell us, is this a risk we're willing to take to write this policy? So there's some times where you don't go the full 40, you go back because you run into other policies that show up in a database. So, this title's been searched 3 or 4 times in the last 10 or 12 years. A lot of times you'll stop there. But yeah, 40 years is your full search. There are certainly scenarios where, we get back into deeds that are over 100 years old. Every single month, there's something that just isn't clear from the record we have in the short term. So we go back further. But yeah.
But you go back as far as you need to get the answer or the assurance you need.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the whole game for us is we need to feel we're going to issue an insurance policy and we're going to be on the hook for it. So we need to be confident that we're, to a buyer and to a lender, we're saying this is good title. If there's a problem, we'll stand in for it. And we're going to, there's a company behind us that has billions of dollars, like any other insurance company, that'll handle your claim and make it right. So, there are, like I said, there are some scenarios where it just doesn't make sense to go back the full 40 years. If geez, this thing's been searched 5 times in the last 10 years, we're not going to find anything new. Or if we do, the odds of it existing are so small, we're comfortable with kind of a risk analysis saying, let's write that policy. But there is, we're on the hook for this. So we do take it, really seriously about how we search that title. And frankly, it's one of the things that does differentiate us, that we do all our own titles in-house. We don't have any 1099 people doing title searches. We don't have any from out of state or, God forbid, in a different country trying to understand Maine real estate and give a good title search, which also ends up giving us a really low claims rate. Our company produces we're like, I think the last 3 years, we're in the top 5% of companies for claims, meaning we have the fewest claims, which means part of that's luck, right? You have a big claim. Sometimes that can throw it off. Sometimes stuff just happens. It wasn't recorded the right way or whatever. Or somebody fraudulently signs a deed. But when you consistently produce good searches, you tend to have a low claim. So it's another thing. It's great that you have a policy, but if I told you, hey, we can insure that, but you might have a claim down the road. Or would you have to say, we can sell your policy and it's actually pretty unlikely that you'll ever have a claim. You'd rather have the lower claim rate to back it up as well. So
I think the security of knowing that it was a good search and the risk is exceptionally low makes that a lot easier.
Right.
So, okay. So we'll come back to title insurance here in a second, but in Maine, we've got a variety of deeds.
Yes.
And sometimes that matters and sometimes it doesn't matter. And I know that oftentimes there's confusion around, what deed's the best? What deed can I get?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the types of deeds?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so in a general sense, you could do a whole semester course on deeds, but in a very general sense, there's 3 types, right? There's your warranty deed. That's most promises. Best, it's a guarantee. There's your quick claim with covenants, which is kind of your middle ground, medium amount of promises. And then there's your quick claim without covenants, which is your as is, where is, no promises whatsoever. So you have a lot of promises, medium, and none. So your warranty deed is where your seller is signing off saying, I guarantee you that this title is good forever. And there's a handful of technical promises that they're making, but it's good title. And regardless of how old the problem is or how it came into being, if I sign a warranty deed, I'm agreeing that I'll stand in. Essentially, I'll be a defendant in a lawsuit if a problem can't be solved. Your quick claim with covenants, that medium promise, has the same types of promises, but they're time limited. And that person who signs a quick claim with covenant deed is saying, this title is good as long as I have owned it, but I'm not making any promises about before my time. I just don't have personal knowledge, which in a lot of ways I think is probably the most fair thing to ask for.
Sure.
It makes common sense to me. But for whatever reason, the industry standard has always been that sellers sign warranty. So whenever somebody backs off that and says, I don't know if I want to sign that, usually almost instant reaction from buyers is like you said, like, well, wait, what do you know? Do you know something? Yeah, right. Is there a problem here? But so that's the middle one. The lowest one is the quick claim without covenants, which is truly, it's like as is, where is on a bill of sale. Yep. I make no promises. In fact, someone who signs that deed doesn't even promise that they own the real estate they're selling. They're just saying, if I own it, you now own it. I'm conveying it to you, but that's obviously a scenario where it really makes sense to do a title search and buy a title insurance policy. And I always say it really makes sense to buy a policy with any of those deeds, because if you play the worst case scenario game, right? You got a warranty deed from somebody. So you have somebody you could sue if they messed up their title. Now you have a big problem. They didn't get a signature from some relative because they forgot to probate the estate, but you go to that relative and they say, no, I want some money, or who knows what. You've got a big problem on your hands. So now you've got a warranty deed seller who you could sue. And you also are smart enough to buy a title insurance policy so you could file a claim. So your 2 options are to go sue your seller or to file an insurance claim. And I get that neither of those are really like a day at the beach. You can't wait to do it. But if you had to pick one of them costs you no money.
Right.
There's a system set up. There's their resources. They have money to pay claims and to hire lawyers to fix claims. I've done that claims work before. That has a system. If you want to sue your seller, you're talking about, you got to go find a lawyer who does real estate trials or real estate litigation. There aren't that many of them in Maine. You're going to pay a retainer. You're going to wait out the court system, however long that takes. Even without COVID, civil cases are oftentimes into the 18 months to 2 years to go to full resolution. And then you might not win. That's the other thing I think people forget. Like, well, I'll sue that person and I'll win. It's like, I'm not sure that you always do. If it might be that if you just didn't do a search and you didn't sort of look at it, it could be that the person who purported to sell it to you didn't have the right to. And this other person truly owns it. And now you spent all that time and money and you have nothing. Whereas if you had bought a policy, if they can't fix the real estate problem through litigation or hiring lawyers, they pay you. And that might not be great, but it's better than coming out with zero. So that's why a lot of times, as much as I do want people to understand those different types of deeds, and what they're getting, a lot of times it doesn't matter. If you're going to get a title insurance policy for yourself, you're likely never going to turn to your seller anyways.
Right.
You may have some common sense concerns like, well, why is this person not willing to offer promises since they've lived there for 20 years, for example? So there may be some situations where you might still question that seller to say, really, you can't give me even the medium promises. But then the other nice thing is, when you sell real estate, if you bought a policy at the time of purchase, some of those protections carry on even after you've sold. So you have some sort of lingering protections after your sale. So the different types of deeds, I hate to say they don't matter, because it does. You want to know what the seller knows and what they're promising. But I think in the world we live in now, where most people get a title insurance policy anyways, I don't know that I would get a lot of heartburn over what the seller's promising.
Yeah, it's not as important as we make it out to be, because ultimately the title insurance policy is going to catch problems regardless what type of deed you have.
Right. Yeah. And there's no difference in price. There's no difference in the type of search we do. We don't even really, at the time of search, oftentimes don't even know yet what kind of promises the seller's offering. Because we're on the hook no matter what, right? So we're going to put an insurance policy out there and play. We want to make sure it's good title.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So before we wrap up, let's dive into title insurance here for a second. You mentioned, buying a policy for yourself.
Yep.
So a lot of times we see on the settlement statement that there's a policy on there.
Yep.
We oftentimes miss the fact that it's the lender's policy, maybe not our policy.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about, kind of how title insurance works?
Yep.
How it works for the various parties involved, and what the consumer should be looking for in terms of getting title insurance policy.
Yeah.
Why should they be getting title insurance?
Well, okay. So, your traditional closing that has a couple that's buying, a couple that's selling with a mortgage loan, that will have two title insurance policies. And they're based on the same search, right? The same work support it, but one is a lender policy, and that protects the person, the bank that's lending the money, that if they ever had to foreclose, they're going to get title back that's good title, right? So, and this is sort of one thing we always point out, that every lender under the sun requires lender's title insurance, which should tell you that it's a risk worth insuring for the price that's charged. It's a one-time fee that you pay at closing. It's not annual like a car insurance or a house insurance, because it's a snapshot in time of the moment you close. It protects the lender, that they're going to get good title back if they foreclose. The owner policy, if you just go with the lender policy, the owner has no protection whatsoever. And they would be, like we talked about before, turning back to their seller if there ever was a large problem. If you buy the owner's policy, which almost everyone does now, because it's, for one, it's not that much money. And when you know that the lender does it, and it's going to put you in that better spot where you have an opportunity to make a claim. But what that owner policy does is, if it turns out that there was an old judgment writ that got missed, or that it wasn't recorded right, sometimes they're not indexed correctly, meaning when you go to search Harrison at the registry, if somebody missed an R in Harrison, or if somebody spelled your name funny, sometimes it could be just honest to God missed. It also will protect you against that loss. It also protects you against outright fraud. So if your seller turns out to have used a fake ID and it is not your seller, the title insurance policy will step in for that. That's a new kind of fraud that we've seen a little bit in Maine now, where, especially with vacant land, where somebody pretends to be the seller. There's no house that they've ever lived in, but they get a fake ID that matches a name at the registry, and then they try to sell the land. Policy would cover you for that. They also cover you for the missing heir. It happens a lot in Maine. People don't go to probate court. They just sort of, someone passes and they just assume there's a family understanding that the next generation gets the land, or the grandma's house, or whatever it may be. And they tend to forget about the black sheep uncle who joined the army at 18, that he's still part of the family, even though you haven't seen him in a long time. So there's a bunch of claims like that get covered. And it's some simpler things too. There are a lot of cases where you had a mortgage, you refinanced, and then if you did it during that mortgage boom where loans were getting sold all over the place to different trusts, the release paperwork doesn't come through correctly. It needs to be corrected. Title insurance is going to stand in for that. And at the very least very often it's going to allow you to not even have to deal with that problem. They'll write you what we call an indem letter, say, go ahead and close. This is very simple. It's a simple fix, but it probably takes 60 days. And if you're under contract, 60 days can be a death knell, right? So there's a lot of stuff that comes with that policy. And I just think the nice thing for me is I don't generally have to sell it to people, but certainly, if they have something they want to understand about what they're getting into, that's what it covers. And I usually tell people too, just the only other things that are out there about it that people should know is that any easements that really increase the value of that land, usually it's access to water, but not always. But if if the value of this property is partly because you can get to the lake, get to the ocean over this path, you should let us know that. If it's not obvious, just because we can also ensure that. Generally speaking, easements are not covered. They're too much litigation, and oftentimes they're about silly things like the subdivision has a restriction that you can't have an unregistered car. Now someone's filing a title claim about their neighbor's car that's not registered. We're not getting into that fight. But if it's something important, like, I hate to say that that's not important. You agreed to it, but access to a lake, access to water, that really gives the property its value.
Yeah, something really important.
Yeah, without that, it wouldn't have this. I wouldn't have paid that price for it. Let us know, because usually for not a lot of extra money, you can get that covered. And then the other thing I just try to highlight too is just remember that your title insurance policy doesn't cover acreage. So if it's important to you that you have at least 10 acres because you want to divide it someday, let us know that, because we'll have to get a surveyor involved. But that's probably more in the weeds than you wanted for why title insurance. But covers a lot of things. If anybody had further questions about it, obviously I'm happy to answer them. But.
Yeah. And then cash transactions.
Cash transactions. Yeah. Cash is king, right? I mean, those we do, we've talked about this before we came on, but we don't really advertise generally to the consumer, to the general public. We're really trying for relationships with lenders and brokers. But if there's a individual out there who's doing cash, really once you're under contract, you send us that contract. We're turning titles around even in the busy times in a handful of business days. And without, when you're not waiting for an appraisal, all the other verifications that come with loans. We do cash deals for a very, very fair price, and we usually turn them around. We can almost do them as fast as people want. Once you're under contract, you want to close next week, we almost always can do it, assuming there's no title problem.
Gotcha.
But yeah.
And then where there's no lender involved, owner should still buy title insurance.
I'll tell you this, we don't even close them. If you won't buy a title insurance policy at all, because then we're on the hook in a weird way that our system is not set up for. So partly it's selfish, right? Because, we have E&O insurance and that kind of thing, but we want you, if there's a problem, to use the system that's set up, which is file a claim. And that way there's an insurance company with claims people, with money, with a system to do it. If you don't buy a title insurance policy, if there's ever an issue, you're coming to me and I'm saying, well, you didn't buy a policy, and then we have this, are you going to sue me, or how are we to fix this problem with no resources, with no system set up for it? So we frankly will not do a closing for cash if there's not a policy involved. I do it selfishly for me, but also for the buyers. Like that's insanity to me. You're putting full sales price out there, right? I mean, if you go buy a house and you put down 5% or 10%, it's a terrible thing if that ends up in a big title problem, but you've only lost that 5 or 10%.
Right.
If you put up cash, you've lost 100% of your money. Yep. You need, in my opinion, you need to be insured for that. And to the point where we won't close them. We'll refer you to somebody else if you wouldn't. So
yeah, makes sense. At least it gives everybody some protection and a clean path forward if something were to happen.
Right. Yeah. It's better for everybody.
Yeah, the way we want it. So, all right. So before we wrap up, Patrick, if people want to get in touch with you or want to learn more about Phenix Title, where do they find you guys? Yeah, I mean, probably the easiest way, we have our website, Phenix Title, which we spell unusual. There's no O in our Phenix, I know. So PHENIX title.com is our website. Portland office is 207-774-0434. You can always call us. Those are the easiest way. Really what I would say though is talk to your real estate broker or your lender. They're the ones who hook you up with title typically, and just let them know that, you think we're the ones to go to. That would always be very appreciated. But those are the ways if you want to ever get in touch with us or learn more about it. I feel like I could talk for hours about it. I do a 3-hour real estate course on it. So any questions anybody have, I'm happy to talk more, but I don't want to
putting him to sleep who's watching for just a few minutes to try and figure out what we do.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, appreciate the time today, Patrick. Again, Phenix Title in Portland, we use them a lot. Great partner of ours. Can always get in touch with the questions. Thanks so much for joining us, Patrick.
Yeah.
So once again, another great show, the Maine Real Estate Show. We love just sitting back, casually talking about the Maine real estate market. You got to meet Patrick Thornton and talk a little bit further about title, affordable homes, and let's dive right into that with wrapping up the show of what we took away.
Yeah, and I think that again, real estate's a team sport, and we do a lot of stuff with Patrick. Phenix Title is a great partner of ours.
Yeah.
And they do all kinds of closings, all types of things. But what I like about what Patrick does is he's also a big proponent of educating the consumer along the way. As you heard from that conversation, He loves to educate. He loves to teach. So really for those people, especially first-time homebuyers, they love Patrick because he walks them through the process, and he's happy to sit there and explain everything to you as far as you want to go.
It's always nice to know what you're signing and just, what you might be getting into if some trouble arises. Exactly. But he's got your back, and, it's excellent to be at the closing table always. But also when, Patrick's there to explain everything, we feel much more comfortable. They've done the title work. They've sat down and explained it to folks. So, and he mentioned title insurance.
Yep.
Just making sure that homeowners are protected. Obviously your lender gets it, but if it's a cash closing and, they make sure, and a lot of companies now are making that their policy, that they're requiring that the buyers get title insurance. There's been talk that, that it only goes back so far, concerns. It's one of those, like just insurance in general.
Yep.
You wish you had it if you didn't. Like at the time when you figure it out is like, I should have spent that $500, $600, $700 to make sure I have it when a claim happens.
Yeah. It gives you that peace of mind. And I'll be honest, I always buy title insurance. I don't know anybody that doesn't. And I generally tell people, ask me, should they buy it? I go, well, I buy it for myself, if that's any indication of how important I think it is.
Right.
But for the money you're going to spend, to your point, maybe you never need it, but when you need it, you really need it.
Yeah. You wish you did. Yeah.
You don't want to go through that process of having to chase a seller down and deal with an old issue, or, try to mediate some issue that wasn't yours. Like the insurance just makes the problem go away.
And the legal protection, right? You could eat up what the cost of a title insurance policy costs you.
Oh yeah.
In just a few hours of an attorney digging into, well, what are we talking about here? I mean, you blow right through that cost, 3 to 4 hours.
It doesn't take much.
Yeah. So once again, we really appreciate you joining us for the Maine Real Estate Show. You can check out our episodes on the MaineRealEstateShow.com, iloveportlandmaine.com, and wherever you download your podcast. So we want to thank our sponsors, Farmers Insurance. Obviously, Patrick Thornton at Phenix Title has been a contributor here with the interview that you did. And anything else to add?
No, a great show, great resources. As with short-term rentals, everything else. Yep. If you've got questions, please give us a call, 207-553-2605, JeffSellsMaine.com. We're always happy to help.
Awesome. Thanks again for watching the show. We'll see you next week.